You know, history has a tendency to repeat itself where sometimes you look at things, you look at patterns, you're like, wow, this feels familiar. Now, I had mentioned yesterday that I vividly recall, and it was kind of a surreal time, right? It was a surreal time when you think about, for those that are unfamiliar, we are broadcasting from the MS Communications building, which is right on Monument Circle. And this building opened in the late 90s, like, I'm not sure the exact year, 97, 98, 99, somewhere in there. But it was the epicenter of the New Year's Eve celebration. Now, this was before they had like the 2 to 3 year experiment downtown where they had, and I thought it was a very cool idea, the whole dropping of an Indy car. But I always thought that the Indy car should have been permanently attached to the elevator shaft of Gainbridge Fieldhouse because it was right there on Georgia Street where they did that deal. And just have it on like a timer thing that then goes down the side of the building. Instead, they just had it like swinging by a crane from like 8 feet in the air. It was kind of awkward. And it never really, I think they just had like a guy that was like on a pulley system lowering it. And it just never seemed to totally work or take off. But prior to that, the New Year's Eve celebration, turning the new year, fireworks and, rockets, red glare, the whole deal. The epicenter of all of that in 1999, turning the year 2000, was right here on Monument Circle, right in this building. And it was so surreal being somebody who grew up in Indianapolis that I'm downtown and, I'm this young adult now in this city that had been just empty holes and closed up places for the better part of my adolescence. Now all of a sudden had this vibrant mall and restaurants and bars and all of these people downtown. It was crazy. And, the soon to, and I'm trying to think of Gainbridge Fieldhouse. I guess Gainbridge had just opened. I mean, still the Colts were playing in the Dome, but nonetheless, it was awesome. It was awesome turning the year 2000. But there was this hesitation leading up to all of it. There was this awkwardness from everybody of what is exactly going to happen in the first week or two here. What happens with Y2K? What happens with, there are all these stories about, did you hear, like, these computer programmers, they didn't set the program for what would happen if everything switched on the date to 00, so everything's going to have to shut down. And I know somebody who got a job, and all they do is they sit and they just reprogram all these computers. I mean, this was like this urban legend, maybe it was real, I don't know, for months, if not a year, leading up to Y2K. Then you had the whole debate over, was it really the start of the millennium, or was that 01 because the calendar started on 0? There was all this speculation, all this circulation, all these numbers, right? And history has a way of repeating itself. Because here we are now, 25 years later. 25 years later. We're a quarter of the way now, essentially through the century, okay? Or maybe that's next year. Because, it started at 0. But either way, you come downtown now on this building, they don't have the downtown celebration like they did then. But we're back to, and I guess that's cool that history repeats itself. We got empty holes downtown and restaurants and bars that are all gone. The mall basically a shell of itself. So we're back to 85. That's cool. But in terms of the questions about the numbers and what's going to happen and dominoes that may fall over the next couple of weeks, the epicenter of that is right here in Indianapolis with the Indianapolis Colts. Because even after yesterday and talking our way through it, and we talked our way through that disappointment, that disappearing act, that disaster in New York, and we talked our way through a team that seemingly it felt like just didn't want to win. And you have, with grief, levels of dealing with it and emotion. You know, first you have anger, then you have disbelief, and then you have acceptance. You know, it goes on and on and on. But the numbers are throwing around in my head. And I started thinking about it. And I thought, you know, I don't know if Andy Dalton is still in the NFL or not. Do you know, Eddie? Andy Dalton, he's still with somebody, right? He played this year, right?
Carolina.
He's like 45 years old, right? And Andy Dalton took over the job from Bryce Young, and then Bryce Young ended up getting the job back and whatever else. So it was, you know, we got a glimpse of a pulse from Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton was the last quarterback to come as a visitor and play a playoff game at Lucas Oil Stadium. That's how long it's been. And in terms of since the last time the Colts won the division, since the last time the Indianapolis Colts won the AFC South. Now, I'm not going to say it's been a while, but every other franchise in the South has multiple divisional titles since the Colts last won the division. Now, last night I was at a New Year's Eve party, and the host had all of the NFL, had mini helmets of all of the NFL divisions, and they were lined up in the order of the standings. And as I was looking at that, you know, I'm looking at the NFC West, and I'm thinking, man, you know, they had, you know, San Francisco had a really good run there the last couple of years, and Seattle is one that never seems to totally drop off. And the Rams, you know, within the last handful have won a Super Bowl. And then I'm looking at the NFC East, and I'm like, man, Philly, nobody talks about them, but they're really good. And Washington has got one of the most dynamic playmakers now. And, yeah, it was a down year for Dallas, but they've been competitive at least of late. And you look at the AFC North, you think, man, I mean, Cincinnati, Joe Burrow's done a hell of a job just keeping them in the fight, and maybe it even should get more MVP discussion, except for that he's in the same division with Lamar Jackson and what they're doing. And then Pittsburgh, Mike Tomlin just keeps them around. Boy, these are really competitive divisions. And I'm looking at all the divisions, and then I look at the AFC South, and I think, okay, since the Colts last won this division, gosh, Tennessee has won multiple division titles. One of the years they won like 11 or 12 games. Gosh, the Texans have won multiple AFC South titles. You know, the Jacksonville Jaguars have made a playoff run and won more than one AFC South title since then. Well, you know, wait a minute. Maybe the Colts just haven't gotten their turn at the table because the division, the teams, you know, obviously there are teams that have made strong runs. I mean, well, wait a minute. This is a division that Texans win that I mentioned is the only one where they were like where the divisional winner was over, say, 10 games. I mean, Derek Schultz and I were talking about this earlier today, and Derek was pointing it out. He's like, look, this is a division that has been stuck in mediocrity. And even when stuck in mediocrity, the Indianapolis Colts have not found a way to win the division in that length of time. And I'm thinking to myself, history isn't repeating itself all the way back to like the mid-'90s, is it, when it's like grasping at straws? But one thing with the Indianapolis Colts that changed right around that time that I was down here on New Year's Eve 25 years ago, a quarter century ago, a lot of the players that are starring on this Colts team weren't even old enough or born yet to know the time period I'm talking about. Most of the players on the Pacers were not around then. Pacers and Bucks today, 3 o'clock, by the way, at the Fieldhouse. We're done at 2:30. But with all of that, I thought maybe history's repeating itself again in this. Prior to Peyton Manning, this was a franchise that had fleeting moments of really strong play. Jim Harbaugh and the run with let her rip. Okay. Eric Dickerson and Chris Chandler and Monday Night Football, Bill Brooks, juke on the sidelines, 55-23 over the Broncos in 88. Okay. Strike year, Gary Hogeboom crosses the picket line. They get into the playoffs. They go to Cleveland. Soupy game, but they're representing Indianapolis in 80. Okay. But none of those times did you have ingrained within the franchise a culture, an understanding, a contagious level and understanding and grasp of winning. And that changed around that time that I was down here on Monument Circle. Because when the year turned 2000, the Colts themselves got out of puberty, took off their headgear, put away the Oxy-10, and became adults because they had adults in the room. And it started with Peyton Manning. And it carried to Edgerrin James. And it carried to Reggie Wayne and Marvin Harrison and Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis. And yes, if I didn't live in Indianapolis, I would absolutely lampoon this city for the way it lives in the past and talking about those glory days. And it was a different era. You didn't have social media and individualized branding. Peyton Manning was on the cover when I worked at Hardwick's Pipe and Tobacco, the cigar store in Broderpool. I remember we had a news rack, and so we put magazine covers in the window. And I remember Esquire magazine, Peyton Manning was on the cover of it when he was a senior at Tennessee, and putting that in the window and thinking, like, man, the Colts could actually get this guy. So he was a brand before he even arrived in Indianapolis. But from the time that Peyton Manning arrived in Indianapolis as a brand, as a guy whose father had played in the NFL, as a guy that was the presumptive Heisman Trophy winner, even though Charles Woodson had won it, and a player that almost everybody knew was going to be a franchise quarterback. Peyton Manning came in, he signed a contract, and he was asked, what are you going to do with all this money you just received? And he said, I'm going to earn it. And he did. And he did it by having an attitude and an aura and a presence. That helps that he's a 6'5" guy, carries with him an aura, but you could see it. I covered Peyton Manning's career from the time he was drafted to the time he retired. And I was in there when he would walk in the locker room, and he'd round the corner, and guys are playing, Madden or playing music or whatever, and everybody would kind of stop to see what his mood was. Because he dictated a professionalism and demanded it from everybody. And his teammates were cool with that because they too were professionals. And before that, you had moments, but you didn't have running through it consistently the river current of winning. And that's back where we are now with history repeating itself. We're right back to the question marks, the wondering what's going to happen, and the uneasiness that took place there in the mid to late 90s. And it starts with not even the fault of the players. But when you look at this group of Colts players, by nature, the leader of a team is the quarterback. No matter what grade you're playing. You're in 6th grade. You're getting ready to go into 7th grade, first year of middle school football. Everybody and their brother, they said, okay, who wants to play quarterback? Every kid raised their hand. Everybody knew that the guy that was going to be the one playing the quarterback was the kid that had a green machine when you were younger, and the kid that was like always had like the limo on his birthday, because he was the kid that was like 6 months older than everybody, a little bit more mature. Parents probably had money, so they were able to buy him, some sort of like equipment to get used to throwing with pads on. Everybody knew that guy's going to be the quarterback because he's kind of the most popular guy anyway. And then he's the quarterback, and he's just kind of the leader of the class, right? It's just the way it works. When you have your quarterback be a young player that you've handed the keys to, who is still learning to be a professional, that's okay so long as you have a culture and a locker room surrounding that player that can lift them up until they're able to run on their own. And the Colts have failed Anthony Richardson to this point because they've not provided that for him. Period. They have a coach that they delivered for him who is also the coaching version of that. A guy with training wheels that's learning on the job. Now, Shane Steichen is obviously a very competent offensive mind and taskmaster when he's a coordinator. But there comes more to it when you are the head coach than just being a coordinator. It comes down to disciplining players. It comes down to setting a tone. It comes down to holding people accountable. It comes down to knowing when to push a button and knowing when to back away. And it comes down partially to not putting your quarterback in bad positions and throwing him under the bus because of your inability to handle a press conference or answer questions in the heat of the moment without thinking it through. And Shane Steichen this year, on too many occasions from a PR standpoint, has stood at the podium and when answering questions about Anthony Richardson notably, has kind of put Anthony Richardson in the spotlight and put it on him and not delegated or distributed blame elsewhere where it probably should go. And then they bring to Anthony Richardson, okay, we're going to give you players around you that set a tone or win football games, like your best offensive weapon, Jonathan Taylor, who's seemingly a nice guy. But when Jonathan Taylor and when Anthony Richardson is showing up at his first training camp, the guy that he most needs to feel comfortable with in terms of knowing that security blanket and that feeling, every time that he goes out on the practice field, he looks over, and the only time he sees Jonathan Taylor, it's when he's coming out of a bus with Jim Irsay to discuss his contract. He ain't on the field. He's not getting reps. He's not going through the motions. And then in year two, when Anthony Richardson is trying to find some sort of stability and win over a fan base and set a tone as the leader at quarterback that he can take his team to the promised land into the postseason and try to snap that streak, instead, he watches a guy run, seemingly putting a game away, and he drops the ball before he gets to the end zone. A guy that's supposed to be one of your leaders. And then you go to the other side. Zaire Franklin. Nice guy. Been somebody that's got a charity. He's done a lot of different good things in the community. He's come on this program and been a good sport. But he talks a lot. And I get it. We now live in a world where, unlike Peyton Manning, who had to rely on Esquire magazine to get his brand out there, all players now are their own brand and their own distribution of said brand. But when it comes to setting a tone, setting a narrative, setting a culture, setting a theme, and being leaders, it's one thing to do it quietly inside your locker room. It's other things to put everybody on blast and put them in a bad position because you're building your brand individually when you're away from your team, like Zaire Franklin, who's been telling anybody that would listen that he belongs in the Pro Bowl because he's got a ton of tackles. You know, when I worked in St. Louis, Ray Langford was a good player for the St. Louis Cardinals. I was watching a game early in my time in St. Louis. Ray Langford had a 2-home-run game. I said, man, this guy's unbelievable. Guy next to me goes, you're new around here, aren't you? I said, yeah, I just got here. How'd you know? He said, I know because you thought Ray Langford's numbers were unbelievable. I said, dude, you said 2 home runs. It's like his 4th multi-home run game in the last 2 years. Guy said, you ever check the score of him? I said, what are you talking about? I said, yeah, Ray Langford hits 32 home runs a year. Guess what? Like, the majority of them are in a 7-0 game in the 8th inning. What's he do in the bottom of the second when the bases are juiced and they're down 2 runs and he comes up with 2 outs? 4 pitches, sits down, right? Zaire Franklin is a good player, do not get me wrong. But he's also a guy that has a ton of tackles, but he's starting to feel like the football version of, like I talk about, a 2025 guy. Empty tackles. Tackles that are there because somebody's got to make a tackle. But they're not coming in moments when you most need it. They're not coming in moments when a guy that's a journeyman quarterback has a 3rd and goal from the 5. And They're not coming in games where you forecasted on your podcast and building your brand, and I know that that's part of football in 2024. But this is Zaire Franklin on his podcast, right?
The
Back
Trenches.
in October, the Trenches podcast, when asked what teams he most likes to play, and in particular towards the end of the year, knowing that the penultimate game of the year was going to be in New York taking on the New York Giants. And here's Zaire Franklin. This was 2 months before giving up 45 points to the New York Football Giants.
I want to play a team I know we gonna spank like the Giants or some. Like,
Well, we do play them this year.
Yeah,
So you got.
I want to play a team that ain't good with a big market. So yeah, so put New York Giants. I'm trying to get my rank up. You know what I'm saying? Right around November, December. Come on, baby, I need that.
I need that.
Yeah, Daniel Jones. Yeah, man. Yeah, Why with your boy? Yeah, I want to play them. I don't want to play no good team. I don't want to play no team I don't want no battle. I'm tired of battling Houston and all these. Give me the sweet teams. Like, give me a 4-11 Giants team. No disrespect to Bobby. I love Bobby. I'm sorry.
Talking about Bobby Okereke, I assume, right? That right there tells you everything you need to know. How possibly can a guy that is one of your leaders, one of your captains, how possibly can that guy go and say that? And first off, shame on me. Shame on Holder. Shame on Joel A. Erickson. Shame on Kevin. Shame on whoever. Shame on all of us. Unless those guys, unless I'm in the rarity here. But shame on all of us back in October for not immediately hearing it then and thinking, wait, what? Maybe we just weren't paying attention to the Trenches podcast. I don't know. But to hear that about a guy talking about a game that still is on your schedule, upcoming, and to say, wait a minute, how does this happen? How does this get put out there? And nobody says, wait a minute. You're talking about this is the National Football League, any given Sunday? And then I was thinking about how history can repeat itself, and I thought in this case it wouldn't, though, because there's no way that would have flown. Now, granted, you wouldn't have had a podcast back in the Manning era, but the closest we can talk about is Mike Vanderjagt airing private locker room stuff out of the country in an interview in Toronto. And as Vanderjagt came on with us, and I love that he did, and I appreciated that he did, talking about the fallout that took place with him talking about Peyton Manning and Tony Dungy, and guess who took care of it? Peyton Manning. And yes, Peyton Manning and Mike Vanderjagt both have since said that they should not have aired it publicly, but Vanderjagt said, I'll never forget coming back and walking into the locker room and seeing Manning and walking up and saying, like, man, what were you talking about? And Manning said, me? What were you talking about? And Vanderjagt said, and then we talked about it right there. We hashed it out. We ironed it out. They were professionals. They were grown men. Yeah, sure, they made a mistake, but they handled it internally, and it was taken care of. And then they went on and won a lot of games, right? And that's how you handle those things when you are a professional and you're an adult. But seemingly, that didn't take place with Zaire Franklin. Even before they got completely waxed by not even Daniel Jones, but the guy that came in at the 11th hour to replace him because Daniel Jones got cut. And then they bring in somebody else who's a journeyman, and that guy helps drop 45 on your defense. And if you want to know how it is that that player in that culture in that locker room can say those kinds of things that would turn out to be that ominous and that inaccurate and that flat out embarrassing, then you get your answer yesterday from Shane Steichen, who wanted to make sure that Zaire Franklin didn't say the most head-scratching thing of the last 3 months. And when you hear what Shane Steichen said, it makes sense, but you are disappointed. And I'll play it for you in just over 5 minutes. And I want to tell you this, you're not going to be disappointed between now and 7 o'clock. If you get to a Jiffy Lube, you still have time between now and 7 o'clock. Go into any Central Indiana Jiffy Lube to get your signature service oil change. And if you have a monthly car wash program sticker in your window or your license plate, point it out to the Jiffy Lube team member and $20 off your signature service oil change and a free tire rotation courtesy of Jiffy Lube, who wants to make sure, if you care about the outside of your car, that they're going to help do everything they can to take care in the underbody and the tires of your car. Central Indiana Jiffy Lubes between now and the end of the year, and they close today at 7, so guess what? That means you have until then to do it. What Shane Steichen had to say and why it's head-scratching next. Bob Kravitz going to join us coming up about 30 minutes from now. Scott Agnes, top of the 2 o'clock hour. And then at 2:30, Eddie Garrison actually takes off one hat and puts on the other one.
Very big hat.
It is.
Very big
9
hat.
1/4, right?
I thought it was 3/4 or 7/8. I think it was 7/8. Yeah, 7/8.
As the Pacers are taking on the Milwaukee Bucks, we will see if Giannis goes. He has been out with illness, but is expected, I think, to play. Do we know yet, Eddie, whether or not he's in
Nothing yet.
the mix?
My guess we'll find out in probably a half hour or so, because I think it's about an hour and 10, hour and 20 before the head coach of the Bucks, Doc Rivers, meets with the media and has to announce that type of stuff. So we'll see.
Will be fun, though, and a Happy New Year to all of you. Hopefully that if you had a good 2024, 2025 continues the same, and if you had a 2024 that left more for you, that it arrives for you with the new year, and most importantly, that everybody has a healthy transition into the new year. I probably
Jake,
will tonight.
Same to
Yes,
you.
sir. Thank you, Eddie.
You're welcome. See, 'cause I'm
Probably
nice
will
to you.
tonight run Uncle Jake's Taxi. Usually I do this I usually get home around 12:30 or so, and the rules are simple. If you need a safe ride home, you can tweet or DM me, and I will take you from wherever you are to your home location. I will not take you to another party or a bar, and you cannot puke in the Jeep. If you do, there is a surcharge. But I will probably run that tonight after midnight, depending on how tired I am, because I'm a little tired. Now, I'm also tired of...
I have a question before
Yes,
you
sir?
get back into the Colts here real quick. Do you have, cleaning supplies in the Jeep just in case of an emergency?
No, that's why there's a surcharge.
Okay.
The actual surcharge, if you do boot in the Jeep, you're cleaning it up, but with your own shirt.
Oh.
Then you have to put it back on.
Ooh.
So far, that's never happened, and I've given dozens of rides over the years. Now, and I realize you could always Uber, but Uncle Jake's Taxi is free. It's complimentary, meaning you have to compliment me the whole time. Shane Steichen yesterday in addressing the Colts loss to the New York Giants, and it's hard to believe and easy to forget that they still have a game to play. How many people are going to be at Lucas Oil Stadium on Sunday?
Oh, boy. It's going to look like a preseason game in my estimation.
Yeah, and it would be one thing if you were playing, for example, if they were playing Tennessee or Detroit or Cincinnati
is a good one, yeah.
and one of those teams had and the game meant something to that team and they had to win to get in or whatever else. You can imagine how many people would travel in for it. But Jacksonville, first off, Jacksonville has 7 fans, and 6 of them are actually at a Leonard Skinner reunion tribute party. So, one guy maybe is coming up. But obviously, the fan base is aware of Pat McAfee, the former Colts punter's comments about his disappointment in the Colts' accountability and his insinuation that part of the Colts' problem involves players showing up late for meetings, players showing up late for treatment. I think even though there was no name mentioned, one could easily determine that Anthony Richardson was the target of that. Richardson's maturity, while it has never been discussed or said specifically what it was that was the cause of Anthony Richardson's benching, and it also has never been determined whether that was a move by Chris Ballard or Shane Steichen. All account is that was Shane Steichen's decision. 2 ways to look at that. You could say that that was a brilliant coaching move because it awakened Anthony Richardson and got him going in the right direction in terms of his commitment. Or you could say that it was a disaster because it may have cost them the possibility of having a playoff situation, not putting yourself in position where it comes down to Jonathan Taylor crossing a goal line with the football or the defense figuring out a way to shut down the vaunted offense of the 14-point-per-game New York Giants. But either way, Bob Kravitz, who's going to join us in 25 minutes, asked Shane Steichen to comment on the insinuation that there is an issue with players being late to meetings, treatments, and practices, and this is the answer from Shane Steichen.
Yeah, I think with any team, right, not everyone's going to be on time every time, but there is accountability, and guys are held to a standard.
Just stop
and
it right
that is
here.
talked.
Play that again, and let me hear that first line again. Please, let me hear that one more time.
Yeah, I think with any team, right, not everyone's going to be on time every time, but there is accountability, and guys are held to a standard, and that is talked about in-house. And when the standard isn't, not getting in the playoffs, it's frustrating. So it's frustrating for a lot of people, myself included, and that's why we talk about the standard just being raised so we're not, in these situations.
Listen. I try my hardest to be objectively fair. He's right. He is. He's right in this regard. He's right in the regard that in any walk of life, give me a profession off the top of your head, Eddie.
Firefighter.
A firefighter. Now, you certainly hope the firefighters aren't late to the fire, but in terms of a firefighter who has to show up at 6 p.m. for his 24-hour shift, are there times where somebody's like, hey, where is Dave? It's 5 after. And then Dave shows up and is like, dude, I got stuck behind some cement truck and then there was a train crossing and I completely, yeah, okay. I mean, that does happen. Sure. He's right. That happens. In any walk of life, that happens. However, and this is part of, we talk about the growth, the maturation process of the franchise in general, of the roster, of the quarterback. Seemingly, every time that Shane Steichen has had to give an answer representing the discipline, the culture, the accountability of his franchise, he has given the wrong one. That's not in any way, shape, or form an attack on his football acumen. That's not in any way, shape, or form an indictment on his ability to understand how to draw up plays or know what to do in a game situation. But it is indicative of an inability to have the foresight or forethought to anticipate things in the way that you're going to explain them. And yeah, dealing with the media has nothing to do with winning football games on a sideline, or does it? It just shows from the very top, a green nature. That answer is probably the worst answer that you could possibly give. The worst answer that you could possibly give. Because the reality is this. The reality is an accountant occasionally is late because of traffic. A dentist is occasionally late because the patient before was running behind and it cost him to go over. An attorney is occasionally late to a briefing because he forgot his briefcase on the way out and got 3 blocks from home before he realized that the important documents were in it and he had to go back and get it. A teacher is occasionally late to a parent-teacher conference because their child's school called and they've got to go pick up the kid and drop him off and then come back and meet with the parents. All of those things take place, right? But the person that is meeting with that teacher, the person that is meeting with that accountant, they're not the ones that are paying good money to go watch those people perform. And when you are asking a fan base, a city, a group of people in this town that in an era where people are making decisions on where they want to spend their money, what they want to do with it, the only thing that people ask, whether it's rational or not, whether it's fair or not, whether it is legit or not, whether it even can be executed or not, the one thing that people ask before they put down $150 to go to a game and sacrifice 5 hours out of the day and pay $20 for parking, the one thing they ask is that the people that they're paying to watch have a commitment, an understanding, and a no excuses policy on the approach of preparation. And when you hear the guy that is in charge saying, yeah, I mean, that happens everywhere, right? No, that's not what I want to hear. But we have accountability. Do you? What accountability is there? What accountability is there? Sure, Anthony Richardson was benched for 2 games. Maybe that's the accountability we're talking about. Was there accountability against Jonathan Taylor for holding out for an entire year when he needed to be, or for an entire preseason, when he needed to be working with his quarterback? No, he got a bonus for it. Hallelujah. He was playing chess. Everybody else playing checkers. Got more money. Good for him. Good player. But a winning player? I don't know. Was there accountability for Zaire Franklin 3 months ago going on a podcast for the world to hear and mocking the team that just kicked his ass yesterday or 2 days ago? Is there accountability there? Did anybody call him in and go, hey, man, you just completely embarrassed your entire franchise because you're supposed to be one of the captains. You're talking about and mocking a team that you're saying that you want to play because it's a layup win, and you airballed a layup. You didn't even airball the layup. You were like the guy that has to wear the oversized 28 shoes at halftime of a Pacer game that has to go out and dribble from the free throw line and then try to hit a layup, and you fall down like 8 feet from the basket. That's what happened against the New York Giants. Is there accountability for those things? That was the worst possible answer that he could give. The worst possible answer. And it leads to the continuation of questions about this team going into the offseason, the biggest of which would be, who's going to be there Sunday and why? This Eddie Garrison may well be my favorite Prince song. Delirious is up there too.
It's a good one.
Now,
yeah.
do you think 1999 by Prince was played more often on this night 26 or 25 years ago? Do you think more people played 1999 on the New Year's Eve turning 1999 or for the final time on New Year's of 1999?
Probably the December 31st of 1999.
Think so?
I think so.
I think in 98 people, though, because they're like, oh, yeah, tonight we're going to party like it's 1999 because at midnight it's going to be 1999.
Yeah, you could say the same thing on last
I know,
day of the year, right?
You know, yeah. Pacers in action, 3 o'clock at Gainbridge Fieldhouse taking on the Milwaukee Bucks. Rick Carlisle joined Kevin and Andy this morning on the wake-up call with KB and Andy. I thought had some really interesting things to say, notably talking about a guy, and it's time that we start more regularly, Bob Kravitz, by the way, 12 minutes from now, having this conversation, and that is Andrew Nembhard's really good.
Very good.
And I thought Rick Carlisle made a really good point when he said, you know, they were pointing out Kevin was about their record with Nembhard in the lineup. And Carlisle said, you know, the more glaring number is not what we are when he's in the lineup, but rather what we are not when he's not there.
5 and 10.
And so then you say, well, what is it that he does? I think it's a number of things. And I'm probably a broken record when I say this because I've mentioned this before. But I've always felt like there is such a value. You know, I remember talking to somebody that was heavily involved in the NBA once, and they said to me, the real key is 12 to 15 non-design. And I said, I have no idea what that means. And they said, let me explain to you what it means. What it means is for every great team to truly be great, every team that's like a championship level team or a series contending team or a team that exceeds its on paper value, you need a guy that regularly scores 12 to 15 points a night that are non-designed points. So you know when the Pacers come down the floor and Rick Carlisle calls out a play or gives a hand, you see Halliburton kind of look over to the side for a second. And I don't know, I assume this is still the case. I know it was absolutely the case when George Hill was the point guard because Hill and I talked about it once. And I would assume this is still the case. Each play that is called out has an alternate play that goes with it. So Halliburton comes down and Rick Carlisle calls out, you know, down A. Okay, so he calls it down A play. So the down A play is that Halliburton's going to come down and his first pass goes to Siakam on the low block. But they all know that the down A alternate play is an up C. So if Siakam is covered, then everybody knows if Halliburton is not throwing into Siakam, we have now transitioned to up C play, which is ultimately to get Ben Shepherd in the corner. And so they know that that's what they're running. That doesn't mean that every possession goes the order of or the game plan of the design. When you have a guy that can score 12 to 15 points per night on sets that were not designed sets, where in other words you had to deviate from the plan and kind of freestyle it, and that guy bails you out of that possession, you get a free possession there because you're like, oh man, down A was covered and up C, all of a sudden they shifted on that and that's covered too, and now we're just freely moving the ball around until we get into the 6-4 range on the shot clock, knowing that that's going to have to set up for a shot here. And Andrew Nembhard is as good as anybody in the game right now, seemingly, and I'm not saying they don't design plays for him, but I'm saying TJ McConnell does this really well as well. But when Nembhard has the ball and the shot clock's running down, his ability to create a half a man's space for himself to get a shot off either in the mid-range or step back and even hit a three is really, really above his size. And he gets you those points with a very efficient rate in possessions that are not designed for him. He makes really good possessions out of what seemingly otherwise are throwaway possessions. In addition to that, he is right now, without Aaron Nesmith on the floor, he is probably their best on-ball defender, and certainly in the backcourt. And as good as Halliburton is as a player, he is obviously not a great defender. Having that backcourt defensive presence is a huge difference maker for them. But all of that to say, at the beginning of the year, and I'm guilty of it too, at the beginning of the season, when you looked at the Pacers and they were struggling and they were off to a terrible start, and Halliburton was like, is he hurt? What's going on? I think what we realized is that Halliburton needed his running mate, which is Nembhard, and the Nembhard also, as good as he is even better when he has some of that defensive pressure taken off of him when Aaron Nesmith works his way back in. So right now, even though Obi Toppin's out, Jarris Walker's played pretty well in the substitution, if you will, or the increased minutes that Toppin left void. So once Toppin comes back, I don't think he's going to play today. Then your one missing link still is Aaron Nesmith. And then you're back to full strength. And if you look at the way that they've played since Nembhard's come back, yeah, I know it was disappointing in Boston in game one of those two that they got there, but they still get the series against them. And there's no reason to believe, number one, that they can't be with the same level of fluidity in April, May, and June, assuming they stay healthy, that they were last year in terms of their cohesiveness, the way they played, their efficiency, once everybody is back in the mix. But in addition to that, you do have to factor in, to be fair, that part of their success in the postseason last year, sure, was somewhat due to or benefit from attrition within the Eastern Conference. I mean, obviously Milwaukee was banged up. New York was pretty banged up. I mean, there was a lot going on there. Cleveland. But if you look at it now, it's not like anybody necessarily is pulling away from them. I mean, they're still within, we'll go with Orlando. That should probably be the benchmark. They're within 3.5 of Orlando. That puts them in the 4 seed. That's probably 3.5 is a decent gap. But they're only 2 back of Atlanta in the 5 spot.
Still over 40 games left.
Totally. I mean, you forget the fact that how early in the year it is here. I mean, it's really early, right?
Yep.
So, chance to get to 500 today, that'd be great. End the year, technically speaking, the calendar year, at 17-17. And then what you got? I'm trying to think. You'd have 47 games left, nearly 50 games left, right? Is my math there right?
34, so yeah, 47.
I mean, that's a ton of games.
48.
And you're yep. doing it.
Yeah,
you're going into that, kind of limping your way towards it until you get Nesmith and then, obviously Toppin back. And Toppin's been playing really well. But the other thing that benefits them, it's impossible to think that once those guys come back that you're healthy all the way through. I mean, that's impossible in today's NBA. But this start, while they took their lumps, and it was certainly bumpy and there were a lot of potholes, they've gotten minutes from guys that you didn't think were going to get minutes this early in the year. Johnny Furphy's a good example.
Furphy's actually looked pretty solid.
I know.
Lately.
And if you go back and look, and again, I know we're going way on the way back here, but I always reference the fact, apples to oranges to an extent, but when Rick Smits was a rookie, nobody thought he was going to have to play right away. And then Steve Stepanovich gets hurt. Smits has to get thrown into the Wolves. He was not yet ready to play. His body wasn't ready to play in the NBA, but he got his way through it. He learned his way through it in that rookie year, had a good year, and then obviously you saw what happened. For Furphy, I don't think anybody thought he was going to get minutes in rotation this early, but attrition forced that. And now if there are spot minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes here or there in the postseason or late in the year in critical games, he's not going out there wide-eyed because it's not like he's never been out on the floor before. That stuff matters. Quite frankly, that stuff does matter. Bob Kravitz yesterday, I think, he might still be incredulous over the answer Shane Steichen gave him. We'll explain, and we'll talk to Bob next. We'll see whether or not anything changes with the Indianapolis Colts after New Year's Day. As yesterday, Shane Steichen, I could just sense it. I've known Bob Kravitz for a while now. We have not only sat near one another in press conferences or on press row, he is a far more accomplished journalist and sports writer than any stratosphere that I will ever see. However, also been around him in social settings, and so I can read him a little bit, and I could read from afar his incredulous nature to the answer that Shane Steichen gave. Now, Eddie, before we bring on Bob, I want to play again Shane Steichen's answer. This was yesterday in the Colts press conference. We played it for you earlier when Bob asked Shane Steichen to react to the allegations made by Pat McAfee of the Colts having players that were late to meetings, late to practices, and having a kind of laissez-faire approach at times to things. And Shane Steichen had this to say.
Yeah, I think with any team, right, not everyone's going to be on time every time, but there is accountability and guys are held to a standard. And that is talked about in-house. And when the standard isn't, not getting in the playoffs, it's frustrating. So it's frustrating for a lot of people, myself included. And that's why we talk about the standard just being raised so we're not, in these situations.
By the way, first off, the fact that he, and I think it's a Freudian slip, said the standard is not making the playoffs.
Uh-huh.
Like, wait, what?
Yeah, what?
Yeah. Bob Kravitz joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Bob, are you as incredulous a day later as you were when he said it?
That's the word that I was just going to use. I was incredulous. I just can't. Here's the problem. It doesn't matter if you're good with the media or if you're not good with the media as a head coach. I mean, Bill Belichick was the worst of the worst for all those years and won, 6 Super Bowls? What matters is the messaging. And the messaging has to be smart and consistent and concise. And it's got to be a message that everybody shares in. And this is twice this past week that Shane, who I think would acknowledge that he's not real good at this part of the job, that he really stepped in it. And I just think for a fan base that's pissed off and they've had enough of this, hearing him trip over his words. And look, it's not like he didn't know the question was coming. I can guarantee you he knew the question was coming, and he still tripped over it. I mean, Buckner had a great answer. He knew the question was coming. I mean, somebody was going to ask. It might as well be me, right? So yes, incredulous is the word.
Now, DeForest Buckner's answer essentially was that he thought that there needed to be changes. I'm paraphrasing there, but
yes.
But is that a fair way of summarizing DeForest Buckner's comments?
Yeah, and he confirmed that there was truth in what Pat McAfee said. Now, look, this is not a news flash. We knew early on in the season when Kenny Moore and Julian Blackmon and Zaire Franklin all came out and said there are culture issues with this team and we need our young guys to step up and start acting like professionals. I mean, we knew there were problems back then, so this is not a news flash, but it is interesting and newsworthy when one of your top players, maybe your top player, comes out and says, yeah, we have had these culture issues. We have had guys who were late, and that's kind of where it stands. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be changes. There have got to be changes. It's just a matter of, how thorough those changes are.
What changes do you believe DeForest Buckner was insinuating needed to take place? And I don't mean culture. I mean from personnel.
Oh, boy. Well, I mean, they got to make a decision on a quarterback, and I don't think they have a choice. I think the die is cast. I think they've got to give Anthony Richardson at least another full year to show what he's got. I don't have the list of free agents off the top of my head, but I would say guys like Blackmon got to go. Zaire really disappointed me this year. I know he had 1 million tackles, but sometimes his mouth got in the way of his better sense. He's a smart guy, which it's just a little disappointing. I think they need to get some backup running backs. They need to improve the wide receiver room. I keep hearing how Pierce has had this great season. He's caught, 35 passes? That's a great season? I don't see it. But they got to get some tight ends. They got to shore up the run defense. What am I missing here? I mean, their secondary is inexperienced and not very good. I mean, this team needs to be blown up pretty thoroughly.
Bob, I think,
in my view.
I think personally, and let's start with this. We'll start with personnel in terms of players. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily individuals. I mean, E.J. Speed's a free agent. Mo Alley Cox is a free agent. Ryan Kelly's a free agent. We can sit there and go over those, and there's plenty of time to still do that. To me, it is more so this. Who are the adults in the room? And I'm not talking about from coaches. I'm talking about amongst players. I mean, DeForest Buckner, we can say that. But in terms of guys that set a tone, not only in what they say, but in clearly guys that you trust are sitting people down and saying, look, I'm going to be the sheriff here, and here's how things are going to run around here. Who else is there on that roster that you believe truly are guys that set a policy and back it up?
Well, I was going to say Zaire because, I mean, he is the leader of that team. But having said that, what has he won? I mean,
well, and did you hear,
it's not good
Bob,
enough.
did you hear the clip from Zaire Franklin's October podcast?
Oh, yeah, about the Giants and how it would be nice. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. He is a smart guy who I think said some really stupid things on his podcast.
And to be fair, Bob, because I want to speak for both of us here, because I think I can speak for you on this. He is a good person. I mean, it's not like he's a bad guy, right? But I think he is a guy that very clearly has not been in winning situations and understood all that entails.
Right. Look, I'm not blaming him for them not winning. I'm just saying that he's been the leader on a team that clearly has internal issues. I can remember a player telling me early in the season, we were just BSing, and he was telling me, we got a lot of young guys who need to grow up, this player. So, this has been brewing all season long. We saw it kind of reach an inflection point when Anthony got sat down for 2 games. So it's been quite a mess. I mean, you look at it from any vantage point, this looks a little bit dysfunctional.
Okay. Secondly, Bob, in terms of the quarterback, this to me creates a pickle. Bob Kravitz is our guest, by the way. You can read Bob's column on Substack, bobkravitz.com. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Bob, there's a bit of a pickle here, and I want you to tell me if I'm overthinking this. And I don't know that this is the case, but if the Colts decide that they need to move on from Chris Ballard, or if the Colts decide that they need to move on from Shane Steichen, the first, I think, more likely than the latter. Yeah. However, can you get a general manager to come in? The problem is this. When you have a young quarterback in Anthony Richardson, if you are going out and you are getting, whether it be head coach or general manager, if you were expecting somebody to come in here and take that job conditionally, meaning the condition that they're going to give Richardson another year, they're going to do A, B, or C, the only people that would conditionally take a job like that are either guys that are trying to restart their career or simply start a career. And then you're kind of back to square one of the unknown. How big a pickle does that all create, and how do you see it wading through?
Oh, boy, that's a tough question. Well, you're overthinking it like you always do.
Thank you.
No, I'm just kidding.
I do overthink.
Look, I don't know if I'm going to answer your question directly. I think that whoever they bring in here is got to be sold on Anthony. Just as an example, I'm not saying he's the guy. Look, Ballard is still here, but Louis Riddick on TV has been a big proponent, big supporter of Anthony Richardson. So I think whoever comes in here has to know that Richardson's going to be the guy. And look, when you draft a kid who's only played 13 games in college, you've got to know that it's going to take 2-3 years before he starts to show what he's got. I mean, this kid is as green as they get, and I don't mean to infantilize him. I say kid, but I mean he's young. He's 22 years old, for God's sakes. And frankly, to me, everybody is kid. So I just think whoever comes in has got to be completely wedded to the notion that he's the future.
And do you believe, Bob? Let me give you a name, and then you tell me in your gut, in your people you've talked to, whatever it may be. 1 to 10 being their job security, 10 being lock, stock. Like Jim Irsay's a 10, right? Like he ain't going anywhere.
Right.
Whatever it may be. So we'll begin with Chris Ballard.
5 out of 10. I'd say it's a 50-50 shot. I am not blind to the fact that Ballard's got 2 years left on his contract. And Jim, this is a team that, look, I'm not saying they're cheap. I'm just saying that they're judicious with their funds. And I don't know that he wants to pay 2 years of Ballard. I think it's a 50-50 proposition. If you're asking me about Steichen, I'd say 95% he's back. I think they need to give him an opportunity to develop Richardson. I think this was kind of a lost year in many ways, but look, the kid just needs to play, man. He just needs to play.
If Shane Steichen is a 9.5 out of 10 to come back, that would seemingly, Bob, be good news for Chris Ballard, and I'll tell you why, and then I want you to tell me if I'm again overthinking it. Jim Irsay, one would assume, because he went through the experiment of bringing in a new general manager in Chris Ballard, but having a coach that was already there in existence and hoping they meshed out, and obviously it set the timeline off a year for Ballard. Will Irsay go through that sort of circumstance again?
I think he would, just like he would bring in somebody who's on board with Anthony Richardson. I think he would bring in somebody who's on board with Shane Steichen. I'm very uncomfortable about this carousel of coaches. I think you need to find somebody who's completely committed to Steichen for the long term. I just don't think there's any other way to go about it. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, listen, I've always said, Bob, in any situation in sport, that oftentimes, like, for example, in coaching, it's one thing to jump up and down that, like, a coach needs to be replaced, and then until you say, okay, well, then with who? I mean, what's out there? I mean, are you opening up into a can of worms, and are you going back into a situation where you're setting your timeline even further back than patience requires right now with the timeline you're currently on, if that makes sense?
I'd be okay with Vrabel. I mean, there are guys out there who I think are very intriguing. I'm still incredulous they didn't go after Harbaugh a couple of years ago. So I don't know. Well, we shall see.
Let me ask you this, Bob. Bob Kravitz is our guest, and this is I want to be very clear here. In no way am I saying this in terms of Jim Irsay's health. We are aware of his health challenges that he's had. My understanding is he is doing better. Having said all of that, do you believe that there would be a time in the lifetime of Jim Irsay that he himself would say, you know what? Eventually, my daughters are going to be running this franchise, so I'm going to go ahead and make that transition now, even though I am still well alive and aware to be able to operate things. I'm going to take a step back. Would that ever take place?
To answer your question quickly, no. I don't see Jim ever taking that, what I think would be a proactive step. I think as long as he's got breath in that body, he is going to own, run, and covet this franchise. And I just don't see any way, shape, or form, unless he's he's diminished to a point where it becomes medically required that he step down. As long as he's still able to do owner things, whatever that is, I think he's going to run the show, and his daughters will just wait on the sidelines.
Bob, do you think Anthony Richardson was just strictly immature at the beginning of the season? And if, in fact, he is the target of these conversations about late meetings and treatments and appointments and things like that, did he realistically learn all of that in 2 weeks?
No, of course not. But, it's like if you have you don't have kids yet, but I don't know. Is there any news you want to tell me? But
I was going to say the yet. I was like, wait a minute.
He's got Boo.
What am I got a cat. Does that count?
Yeah. So what the hell was I saying? I forgot.
About Richardson. I mean, theoretically, if the immaturity issues were there and then he's benched and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, this new light was cast. I mean, did he really reinvent himself in 2 weeks of watching?
It's like if you come down hard on your kid for doing something wrong, maybe that will change their behavior. I don't think he suddenly became Peyton Manning in 2 weeks. I don't think he became Tom Brady, but I think he became more of a pro. There's no question that these players, whether it was Kenny Moore and Zaire Franklin early or Buck or Pat McAfee, there's no question there's a culture problem, and there's no question that they were pointing at Anthony in part. I don't think he's the only problem, but I think they've had problems with some of the younger players on their team, and I think that's all coming out in the wash now. But I do think that the light comes on at different times for guys. And the only thing the Colts can hope and pray now is that the light started to come on for Anthony Richardson.
Bob Kravitz is our guest, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Bob, I wanted to ask you this as well because you covered these two in the trenches probably more so than anybody in this market. And I know that Jim Irsay has an incredible love and respect and appreciation for Peyton Manning. But do you think in any way, shape, or form that the professionalism, the tone, the culture that Peyton Manning created within that locker room, along with Bill Polian, but do you think that Jim Irsay, in a small way, I'm not going to say took it for granted, but started to believe that that was something that automatically came within the franchise and underestimated how much of that simply was Manning and that it went away when Manning did?
Yeah, I don't know if he underestimated. I think he understood and still understands that he had a once-in-a-lifetime person in Peyton Manning. And, you can't expect everybody to live by that work ethic. And he kind of had that with Andrew Luck when he was still healthy. But, as the years, now you're dealing with a 22-year-old. You're asking him to be the CEO, and I'm not sure that he's necessarily prepared for that role. I think he's better prepared now than he was last year or early this season. But yeah, it's going to be hard. I mean, you've got to know that when you draft somebody who's played as few games as Anthony, you got to know it's going to take you 2-3 years. And we're just going through the process now. And that's why I hear people hemming and hawing about whether he should play Sunday. Hell, yes, he should play Sunday. As long as he's ambulatory, he plays on Sunday.
Now, here's the thing that's going to be fun. If Richardson plays on Sunday, Bob, he's playing in front of how many people?
40,000.
That's about right.
It's going to be bad. It's going to be, and it's not like, if I'm telling you, if they're playing a team that was good, and their fans traveled,
Well, I was just
this
saying,
place
Bob,
would be more visiting fans than Colts.
can you
fans.
imagine if they were playing Cincinnati and the Bengals had to win to get in?
Oh, it would be awesome. It'd be they'd be yelling hootie hootie. You know, I mean,
That's
who
exactly
do they think
right.
going to beat them Bengals?
That's right.
Yeah, it would be ugly.
Bob, what's new in the column?
Well, let's see. Actually, you're. I listened to talk radio yesterday all day, all throughout the city, and I just got some thoughts on talk radio in the city. All good things. Well, I mean, as far as you're concerned,
Clearly, you weren't listening from noon to 3. if it's all good things, right?
Well, I was going back and forth because there's 2 shows. I mean, there's only one.
That's
show,
right.
But there's another show on another station. So I listen. So I'll probably do that later in the week. And tonight I plan to fall asleep by about 10 o'clock.
Is it? By the way, is it a critique of local sports radio? Because we could use that, quite honestly.
I haven't really started writing very much of it. I just took notes yesterday. It's a little bit of a critique, but not much. I may be more critiquey of some than others.
Just remember who drove when you went to Springsteen.
I remember that. I know that John has gotten me tickets to concerts. So, it's like us reporters with the nachos at the Colts. We're easily bought off.
It's a barter system, right?
Exactly.
BobKravitz.com, Musings of an Old Sports Writer, is where you can read that amongst all of the other things, including the dopey report card that he does after each Colts game. And tonight it is couch time for Bob, I think, watching college football, he told me. So, Bob, certainly enjoy that.
All right, buddy. You have a happy New Year. Same to all the listeners.
Appreciate it. You the same, Bob. All the best for a healthy and happy transition into 2025 and a healthy New Year as well. Bob Kravitz joining us, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. I miss the days back when I think it was Mark Allen used to be the local media critic, and quite frankly, we probably could use it because, one of the things I've always said, it's I think we all have at times thin egos and insecurities in the business that we're in, but the reality is part of our job is to sit here and discuss and critique and analyze and break down the job performance of those that we are discussing, and yet it only seems fair that that would be done to us as well, and that our feet are held to a fire a little bit, and that we're held accountable for the things we say. We preach accountability, but yet I miss the days when that was there for us as well. You know what I mean?
You talking about us or are you talking about the Colts?
I'm talking about, well, that's the thing. If I'm asking it of the Colts, then I guess it should be held to us as well. But, yes, you are correct. The Colts, in terms of Shane Steichen, they do preach accountability, Eddie. They
do?
Yeah, because they would uphold to the standard of missing the playoffs, which seemed like an odd miss. That sounder means Eddie Garrison has breaking news. You want to hold on to it for a minute?
Oh, I was going to say the Colts have accountability.
Fair enough. All right. The accountability is the standard of missing the playoffs. We come back. We will talk a little New Year's, and then Scott Agnes is going to join us in 35. Eddie, you're spinning all the hits, man.
Thank you.
I saw Petty in Toronto 4 or 5 months before his untimely passing. Is there ever a timely passing?
I was going to ask it if you didn't.
Right. His unexpected passing. But that's one of my all-time favorite songs. Came out my junior year of high school, as a matter of fact, off of Full Moon Fever, Free Falling from Tom Petty. Are you a New Year's Eve guy, Eddie? Are you like, do you get into New Year's?
What do you mean by that question, Jake?
I mean, like some people, all year long make big plans. It's a big evening. It feels to me. Well, you answer the question, then I'll tell you what it feels like to me.
I think I may know what you're going to say here.
Go ahead.
I think what you're going to say is New Year's Eve's a bigger deal when you're a younger adult or teenager or along those lines. It's a way for you and your buddies to get together, have a good time, whether that is having some alcoholic beverages or Diet Cokes, because those are perfectly sufficient.
That's right.
And then once you get to your age, I mean, you just heard Bob talk about he's going to go to bed at 10:30. It's okay. It's just another year. It's another day.
I do think youth is a little bit of a factor. It feels to me like New Year's Eve is okay. New Year's Eve feels like the fabricated holiday of excitement. In other words, societally or culturally in the United States, it's like we're supposed to be all excited for New Year's Eve. And when you're a kid in particular, you assume that it's like this magical evening where you get like elaborate, extravagant dinners and you get dressed up and you're out till midnight and everybody's like, drinking and hooking up and it's this incredible magic, da-da-da. And then everybody you talk to, by and large, is like, yeah, I don't really get into it. Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what other holiday do you think is the one that most people, if you put truth serum in them, are like, yeah, I think it's kind of like a fabricated deal. I don't really get into it.
St. Patrick's Day?
Ooh, that's a good one. Although, St. Patrick's Day now, our tradition that began about a handful of years ago, is we go to the same Irish pub and have a beer. See the same people every year. It's kind of fun.
See, to me, it's one of the way I group those holidays together is like it gives people an excuse to get together and drink.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes.
Those are the holidays that I view.
Yeah, I understand.
In that category.
Okay. The one that, like, if you talk to most people, I think, they're like, yeah, I don't really get into it.
Easter?
No, I think people like Easter.
Yeah.
I didn't like it as a kid because we had to get dressed up. Valentine's Day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think most people for Valentine's Day are like, yeah, it's a Hallmark holiday. It's made up. Remember Sweetest Day? Is that still a thing? That was like a thing for a while there. It's like, it's Sweetest Day. It's like, well, isn't that what Valentine's Day is?
I think that's more of a male response of Valentine's Day, Jake, and getting into it than it is female.
So what are your big plans for New Year's Eve?
Well, I've got to produce the Pacers game.
Understood.
Starting at 2:30, so less than an hour.
That'll be done at like 5, right?
By the way, on the Pacers front, Obi Toppin is available for the Pacers today. So
okay.
That's
coming off the ankle injury, right?
Correct. After I get off the air with Eddie White for the world's greatest postgame show, I probably will go home, pick up Olivia, and then we'll go over to my parents.
Okay. Now, when I was a wee lad on New Year's Eve, we're probably the only people that did this, my sister and I, but
wee lad, how little are we going
elementary school age.
Okay.
We would get hole punchers, and literally the entire night leading up to midnight would just sit there and hole punch and continue to then open up the little hole puncher thing and dump the little circle parts into bowls to make confetti. And then at midnight, we would throw it in the air. And I think probably we fell asleep at 10:30 and somebody woke us up at 11:55, and said, hey, it's midnight, and it's back in the Dick Clark years. And then, that transitioned into my adulthood, which was always fun the last few years that Dick Clark was doing it, to watch him arm wrestle the microphone away from Ryan Seacrest. But I think now, tonight, we go to Slippery Noodle because the Elect is my favorite local band. My buddy Michael and Jimmy and the boys are just incredibly talented. They're tons of fun. They play at the Noodle every year. Marty's the best down there. So we go down for that, but I mean, I'll probably be home by 10, right? And then, like I said, depending on how tired I am, because I did go to a New Year's Eve party last night, and we're going to the Pacer game today. So it's been a busy schedule. I'm very fortunate for that. But
So that's what you call a get-together with you and Derek?
Derek was there at the New Year's Eve party. I took a picture of me. I didn't know that. And we so I may run Uncle Jake's taxi tonight, but we'll see.
Well, you're an insomniac, so you'll be up either way.
That is probably, and I can sleep basically all day tomorrow because we have no show tomorrow, by the way. We will be back on the air on Thursday, correct?
That is accurate.
And one of the
statement.
things that we may be discussing is the game that's going on right now between, and maybe it's dumb of me to counter program like this, but Michigan got out to a 16-0 lead over Alabama. That is significant only because of obviously the narrative about Alabama and not being in, and Michigan having a down year and being 7-5 in the Big Ten. But Alabama now threatening to get within a field goal. They are
went
knocking
4
on
for
the
4,
door.
Jake. They started their first 4 possessions with 4 turnovers.
Alabama did?
Yeah.
That's typically not a great recipe. Now, the counter to that would be if you're Michigan, you probably would like to, on those 4 turnovers, have more than just 16 points to show for it, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. 1 touchdown and I think 2 field goals.
But it's now 16-10. I think most people, I've always kind of liked Alabama, truth be told, but I almost went to school at Alabama.
A Crimson Tide.
You know what? It's funny. When I was in high school, it was during kind of lean years for Alabama football, but they had at that time, and I think this has changed, Alabama had a less than selective admission requirement. So I was not what one would call studious. And so when I was in high school and it came time to apply for college, and I'm very lucky because I grew up in an environment where it was not, are you going to college, but where are you going to college? I mean, like 94% of my graduating class went to college, and I believe every Ivy League school plus Stanford was represented in my graduating class. So I was lucky to be in that environment. But when I'm telling this because there is a sport lesson to it in terms of the value of college athletics and why things are as they are. I know that people want to say it's ridiculous what these kids are getting with NIL, and it's ridiculous the money that goes into college athletics and what they're paying these coaches. I understand all of that. And it is astronomical. The money, Dabo Swinney making $9 million a year, that kind of thing. But when I was a senior in high school, a long time ago, admittedly, I applied to Alabama because my buddy Chris Farkas was going there. We were going to go together because it was the place that both of us could get admitted. And the only other schools really that fell into that category were Kansas, where I ended up going, and I was waitlisted at Ball State. I ended up getting in. And probably Arkansas was the other school. I mean, honestly, I had a 2.2 grade point average, okay? So I was ranked 482nd in my graduating class out of 1184. Very proud of that. But the point of my story being Alabama now, when I was in high school, they were kind of in like a weird period in their football program. And then I went to college, and Gene Stallings became the head coach, and they won the national title, I believe, my freshman year of college. And then they kind of went through some changes again, right? And, you had the Mike Price debacle in Shula, and then they got Nick Saban. And then all of a sudden, they're playing in national championship games on a regular basis. They're in BCS games. They're in big-time bowl games. And they're getting all this exposure, and you're seeing all these, like, the pretty people in the crowd at Alabama and whatever else. And guess what now? If you talk to people I guarantee you there's somebody right now listening, guarantee it. Somebody right now is listening whose children graduated from a high school in central Indiana in the last 3 years, and their kids go to Alabama, Tennessee, or, for that matter, Clemson. Those 3 schools have become very it schools, largely based upon the exposure they got from their college football programs and the exposure of the university and the environment and the social aspect of the football. And you go down and you visit the school and you go to a football game and you love it and you can't wait to go to school there. And based on that, because of the massive increase in applications, interest, and everything else, then it not only increases the selectivity you can have of the kids you're coming in, that then increases the bar for the academic standard of the university itself. Now you're getting graduates that are going into different areas. You're getting a higher endowment. So you do get ROI, return on investment, if you are these universities, odd as it may sound, because of the money that your athletes and your coaches are bringing in for your school based on that exposure. And I'm telling you, Alabama right now, I mean, when I was a senior in high school, I would bet, I don't know this, because my buddy Farkas ended up going there, and he was telling me the vast majority of kids that he knew and ran around with were from either Alabama or Florida. Now you go to University of Alabama or you go to Clemson, and they have these new, instead of dorms, they have these nice apartment buildings because it's all wealthy kids that are coming from the North Shore of Chicago and Long Island and all throughout the upper Midwest and the Eastern Seaboard to go down to these schools, largely based upon the aspect of the college football culture or basketball. I mean, you know, basketball, I don't know that it does it as much, but look at Butler. I mean, when Butler went to back-to-back Final Fours, the number of applications they received and the number of out-of-state, all of a sudden it became an it school. I would bet you Gonzaga's enrollment is higher than it once was, or their selectivity of enrollment is higher than it once was. But I probably should have gone to Alabama, to be honest with you. I went to Kansas. They were ranked number 1. They got beat by UTEP in the NCAA tournament in the first round. Indiana went to the Final Four, and I realized it's where my heartstrings were because I was absolutely in love with the fact that IU was playing against Duke, and they got completely screwed by Teddy Valentine, but that's a different talk show.
You know my takeaway from that entire synopsis there?
That I had a 2.2 grade point average?
Well, that's part of it, and your intellect now just does not match up.
Trust me, the intellect, Eddie, is the same. I was a bit of an Anthony Richardson. The work ethic and being on time was a bit of a challenge. Right?
Really? So you're saying your head was not in the textbooks?
No, it was not. It was in the clouds, but not the textbooks. Scott
the
Agnes,
clouds?
by the way, in 17. I'm fairly certain, by the way, and Brad Hamilton's waxing the cruising vessel right now, in case you're wondering, Eddie.
How many more payments, Jake, until she's all mine?
That's right. Now, I just heard that promo for JMV, and I think he simply had the day wrong. He said back Wednesday. He's not doing a show tomorrow, correct?
Nobody's doing shows tomorrow, correct?
So he means back on Thursday. However, John tonight will be making the return to the JMV takeover on our sister station B105.7.
Ooh.
So as you are out and about, or for that matter, if you are using Uncle Jake's taxi, you will be able to hear John spinning the hits of your choice tonight for the JMV takeover on B105.7.
Now, here's the thing. Are you worried about people trying to use your authority by having you just simply call John? Like, hey, I got Jim in the car with me. He's been out since 6. Can we get him this song going here?
That's good. That's a good point. It'll put it to the test if people get in my car and they hear that I've got something else on. They're gonna be like, "Whoa, hurting on your coworker there." But no, I'm telling you, we'll have it dialed up. I do love the takeover. This for my buddy Scoggin. Jake, couple of things here. Number 1, New Year's Eve is for couples and or drunks. I am neither. Number 2, like Kravitz, I go to bed early, but in my neighborhood, gunfire and explosions start around 9 and go till 3. Okay. Listen.
Drug your dogs.
That's no question, man. Number 3, I hope they do replace Gus Bradley so the paycheck thieves on defense will have one less excuse. To my knowledge, Mr. Bradley has never missed a tackle or let Drew Lock stumble into the end zone in his entire career.
Did you see what Gus said today, by the way, Jake?
I did not.
So the coordinators met with the media about a half hour ago, I would say. And he said that he took responsibility for the reasons of the players missing tackles by not teaching them the proper techniques or whatever. I'm like, at some point.
No, wait a minute.
At some point, either Shane, Gus, or Jim Bob Cooter have to stop taking blame for everything and have to put it on the players themselves for not going out there and doing their job.
Here's the thing. At some point, like, you've seen Tyrese Halliburton's three-point shot, correct?
Yes.
You've seen Reggie Miller's three-point shot?
Yeah.
Neither one of them has a single thing about their form that someone would coach you like in the 8th grade. But they got to this point by clearly whatever it is working, right? So you're not going to teach a professional some sort of a form. I mean, yeah, sure, Tiger Woods redid his swing, or, yeah, footwork or something like that. But in terms of, like, tackle formation, what possibly are you going to be teaching that you have failed, that these guys didn't already have got, taught to them forever? That's a guy trying to follow the sword for his guys, and I can appreciate it. But come on, man. Here's what I would say to Gus Bradley. I can appreciate the gamesmanship of the fact that he is willing to fall on the sword for his guys as a leader, as the defensive coordinator. But what I would ask him is, when's the last time he felt like his guys fell on a sword for him?
Mm-hmm.
That run, Grover Stewart has been a really good player. He is a very good player. But that run that Drew Lock had, like, Stewart kind of looked like,
He got shoved in the back. I didn't know if they'd call a penalty on that, but the left tackle blatantly pushed him in the back.
You could tell he was waiting for the penalty flag because he's like,
But then the whiff by EJ was terrible.
Bad. Right?
The part that gets me, Jake, is it's 3rd and 8. They're playing 6 yards off, talking about the defensive backs. So Drew Lock checks it down to Wan'Dale Robinson, completes it for 6 yards. Or I might have been shorter than that, like 5 or 4. And then he gets the first down still because they can't tackle because they're waiting for the player to come to them. It's frustrating to watch.
Hey, Jake, the holiday that gives people an excuse to drink, party, and have fun used to be on Sundays when the Colts played. That has since died. Okay. I'm really curious Genuinely curious to see what happens Sunday in terms of the turnout. Part of it, too, is you get this, like, holiday haze, right? The one, to me, the one challenge about this time of year, I don't like January. I don't like it. It's the worst month. Can we agree January is the worst month of the year?
Sure.
What's even in contention?
I would put February right there.
Shorter.
Okay.
February's shorter, and if it snows in late February, you at least know that you're towards the end of the tunnel, right?
Mm-hmm.
January is just, I mean, it's psychologically tough for me. It's like, oh my gosh. I mean, you've got to, just when I start thinking about it, it's tough, like seasonal affective disorder, right? And then I worry too about, I'm not going to say where it is.
The reason why I go with Feb is because that's when the NFL season ends, so you don't have your Sundays anymore to watch football playoffs.
I get
over.
it, but you're getting ready for March Madness. The weather's starting to turn a little bit.
Sure.
There's light at the end of the tunnel in February.
Sure.
And it's shorter. January, the problem with this time of year for me, or this week, is you have this, you feel like when you get into Christmas, you got some days off work, and then, you got kind of this punt week, and then another, like, day off that falls in there with New Year's. And so you feel like you're really clicking off days, right?
Yeah.
And then you get done with all of it, and it's back to life, back to reality, and you're like, oh, my gosh. For some reason, I was thinking we were, like, accelerating on cruise control through the month of January, and it's still just starting. And it's back to life, and it's just this long stretch. It's like when you're running the mini marathon, you come out of the speedway. It's just this long stretch on 10th Street, and you're like, oh, my gosh. I'd forgotten how arduous this is. Now, the other thing that worries me, and I was debating whether or not to mention this on the air, but I need somebody to text me their advice on this, or if they're willing to help out with this. But I have to be very selective because I truly do care about this. I'm not going to say where it is, okay? But a couple of months ago, I was somewhere where I saw what I thought was a stray or an escaped cat, okay?
Ah, okay.
And I went to go get food to bring it back, and this is definitely a feral cat. It's a cat that, and I, in the process, I met another guy.
This isn't the cat that got in your Jeep, is it?
It is not. No, that cat thankfully has a great home. But this cat, what I'm getting at is this, and I'm not going to say where it is because I don't want this cat being interrupted or harmed in case somebody's listening that would have that ill intention. But there is a cat that, and I met another guy who has been feeding this cat, and so we kind of take turns making sure that the cat is fed and taken care of. And it is definitely a feral cat. But the gentleman that I've been working with on it has been doing this since the cat first started coming around the area where we discovered the cat. And he was like, yeah, he was like a kitten, like the size of my hand when I first ever saw him. So we estimate this is the cat's second winter. So he's probably just over a year old, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I have gone and gotten like the IACS little shelter that's kind of a cooler thing with hay in it for him for when the weather is cold. And he knows of that because we've kind of like managed to get him over towards looking towards it, but he's never gone in it to my knowledge. Well, I'm genuinely concerned now that the polar vortex is, and I'm being serious, like in a couple of weeks, supposedly we're going to get down like sub-zero temperatures. I don't know that a cat like that can survive in the outside. And so I'm like, oh man, I can't take him in. And I don't know that a cat like, even though he is now, this cat is extremely affectionate and kind to myself and the other guy, but anybody else he would run. So he's gotten to know us because we feed him. I mean, he's not stupid, right? So my point being, he is now somewhat, not used to is the wrong word, but he has exposure to human interaction. But I'm like, okay, once it gets super cold outside, if I see him, do I just get him and take him to like somebody that has a barn or somewhere warm? I can't take him inside. I genuinely don't know what is the answer there. I don't want to take him to a shelter because I don't think he'd last at a shelter. because he's a young cat. He's a beautiful cat, black cat, but, these are the things that keep me awake at night. That and potentially driving people around tonight for Uncle Jake's Taxi. But if anybody has an idea, feel free to send me a message and let me know what they can do to help out. I can't take him to Shannon's, Eddie, because she has 3 dogs. Here's the thing. Okay, now let me tell you something. Shannon lives on, I think I'm okay saying this.
Do you think she wants that out there?
She has a 5-acre wooded property that is all fenced in, but she has 3 dogs. The problem is her parents are 2 lots over, and the backyard is all a fenced-in area. Her parents have 2 dogs, one of which is a Bouvier and is basically a Kodiak bear.
Oh.
Yeah. So a cat would not last long.
But that's her parents, not her house.
I'm telling you, like it's open door policy, dogs running back and forth. It's like a wild, wild west over there for dogs, all over the place. You can't go when you come over for the Shawshank party. You're gonna have dogs crawling all over you.
I'm used to it,
including Fitzy. That's basically a grizzly bear that snacks on cats and other small animals. It would appear. I'm telling you, like this is the kind of thing. Like I keep checking the forecast now because I'm like, oh man. Jake, progressing through the month of January is like driving to Florida and hitting Georgia. That is so correct. You know it's a border state to Florida, and you think you're almost there, when in reality you still have double-digit hours to drive before you get to your destination. Then you get to the Florida line, you're like, free orange juice, welcome center. You're like, wait a minute, I got 6 more hours to go, and I'm just passing a bunch of exits for like Ponta this and Lake this and Port this. Which one's and Fort this? Which one's the one I'm getting to? Oh, it's all the way down at the bottom. Great. Scott Agnes, not at the bottom of the hour, but the top of it, meaning next. 2 o'clock hour, Pacers pregame taking place at the bottom of the hour as the Pacers get set for the Milwaukee Bucks over at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Giannis is the big question mark for Milwaukee. What we do know for Indiana is that Obi Toppin is going to be available to play. Whether or not Giannis Antetokounmpo plays for the Bucks is still in question. But, Eddie, he has had illness, and you are saying that he is a go, right?
Yes. I think it's the first time that Milwaukee will have its 5 starters of Damian Lillard, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, and I'm forgetting who their 4th starter
You know what they
will
say.
be, but, or 5th starter.
If you got to
but
name
Agnes
the 7
does.
dwarfs, you can only think of 6, right?
Yeah.
We'll ask Scott Agnes, who joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Scott, can you name the 5th Bucks starter?
Among that group, you have Bobby Portis, Lopez, Middleton, Lillard, and Giannis.
Bobby Portis, is that who you were missing there, Eduardo?
Yeah, I didn't know if they were starting him and Lopez together with Giannis, though, so that's why I left him off.
It could be different. We don't have the official starting lineup for today, but yeah, as you guys said, both Giannis and Chris Middleton good to go today, along with A.J. Green.
Bobby Portis, by the way, one of those thorn-in-the-side players, no question about it. Let's begin with this. Scott, when you look at it, Rick Carlisle was on this morning with Kevin and Andy and was talking about the importance of Andrew Nembhard. I think we're starting to see that. Certainly, if you look at the numbers of when he's in and when he's out, just how important he is. We await for Aaron Nesmith. Big question is, now that Nembhard is there and Halliburton clearly has a little bit more comfort level with his running mate in the backcourt, still that consistency from offensive aggression for Halliburton is elusive. What is holding back Halliburton from putting together the good games night in and night out like we saw towards the end of last year?
Yeah, it's kind of reminiscent of when he first got here, and he was trying to balance being the facilitator, getting teammates involved, being unselfish, with also being a little bit more selfish and attacking and being the player that the Pacers acquired several years ago from Sacramento. I don't know. Sometimes he just looks disinterested. Other times I don't think he gets too engaged until later in the game. I wish I knew exactly what it was, but what we saw on Sunday in that win in Boston, that's exactly the type of player the Pacers need. The fact that, for example, he was 1 of 6 from 3, nobody's really talked about that because of the production he had elsewhere and the fact that he scored 9 of his 11 field goals inside the paint, whereas it seems like so many times this season, Jake, he's deferred or settled for the outside shot too often.
Scott, when you look at, say, for example, the 2 games in Boston, this is such an elementary question, but it is a little bit fascinating. Same 2 teams, 3 nights apart from one another, 2 nights apart from one another, and like a 50-point swing. What gives?
Yeah, first of all, you got to acknowledge the fact that the first game, the Pacers had tough circumstances. The fact that they had played 24 hours earlier against the best team in the Western Conference. They should have won that game. They came up short. There's that emotional, an emotional, I don't know, gravitas that maybe stays with you a little bit in Indy. You did not have Obi Toppin, who got injured during that game, and Andrew Nembhard did not play Friday. So you were shorthanded, coming off that emotional loss. And that's about all I got there. But then Sunday, you get Nembhard back. You alluded to at the top of the hour how Andrew, I think he's kind of become the most significant player on this team. Certainly not in any one category, Jake, but in totality, what he provides, his steady hand, what he does at both ends of the floor, and certainly his defense for a team that has struggled defensively. If you point to one thing, to me, it's Nembhard being back.
Yeah, Nembhard, listen, Scott, you tell me if you agree with this, and maybe it's off base. But I had a conversation a couple of years ago with somebody about NBA success. And they said one of the things that every great team needs is, and I was talking about this earlier, a 12 to 15 point non-designated guy. And by that I mean a guy that gets you 12 to 15 points a night in sets that there was not designed to go to that player, but he bails you out at end of shot clock expiring, end of sets, and doesn't need plays to go through him to get his points. Nembhard, to me, feels like that guy, but am I selling him short? Are they designing things for him, or is he the guy that when the ball ends up in a hot potato situation in his hands, He just finds a way to score.
First of all, I totally agree with that sentiment in terms of needing a guy or a couple, many like that. That's kind of what I view kind of like a TJ McConnell, right? You're
totally.
not really
McConnell's the other name I mentioned.
McConnell's probably the first reference here, right? They're not calling his number, but he's attacking. He's finding holes in the defense. He's finding those little short-range shots or layups at the basket. Very few times are they calling it. They are sometimes. Nembhard, I think it is cutting him a little bit short, especially because of how many more opportunities with him. Does he have the ball in his hands? That's one thing that he's doing more this season is helping Tyrese more with the ball handling responsibilities, both because of the way in which defenses are defending him and trying to kind of remove him from the equation, but also freeing up Tyrese to do a little bit more and get more rest, let's say, out on the floor, not be so zeroed in and impactful on every single possession. But if you could get 12 to 15 from Nembhard per game, in addition to his assists and his defense, I think that's perfect. And then he's going to have a couple breakout games, right? Like his first year, he had the game in Golden State and the game-winning 3 at the Lakers. Those will come, but those just happen. I don't think a lot of times those are just drawn up for him.
In your opinion, Scott Agnes, our guest, Fieldhouse Files, where you can read his work, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, where he currently is appearing. Your opinion, more overrated, Bronny James or New Year's Eve?
New Year's Eve, no question. Not a New Year's Eve guy. I actually look forward most to tonight is the tweet coming probably 9 o'clock about Uncle Jake.
See, no, hold on. Did you hear me earlier reference this?
I have not at all, no. I've been working on pregame.
Do you know
the
rules of Uncle? Do you know the rules of Uncle Jake's Taxi?
I bet I could name 2 or 3 of them, yeah.
Go ahead. Try it.
Number 1, you're going home. You're not going anywhere else.
That is correct.
No throwing up.
No puking in the Jeep. That's correct. That's pretty much it, right? I think that's.
I was going to say rules. That's about all I have.
Yeah. I will take you from wherever you are to your home location. I will not take you to another bar or another party, and no puking in the Jeep. I don't put this in text, but I do tell people when they get in the car, if they do throw up, no problem, but they are cleaning it. They get charged a cleaning service, and they have to clean it with their own clothing they're wearing and then put it back on.
Here's a better question. Have you had to take anybody up on that?
Have had no recycles, no.
Excellent.
I did have my favorite, as I've told before, this has been 15 years ago, and I just told this story yesterday, but I picked a guy up it was then Mo and Johnny's, now the Bulldog, which is either 52nd or 54th in college. And the guy gets in, and I go, hey, what's going on? He goes, not much. And I said, so where are we headed? He goes, 5705 College. I go, dude, that's 3 blocks. Like, you can't walk 3 blocks? And the guy looked at me and said, and I quote, dude, look at me. I said, okay, that's fair. No way he could have walked 3 blocks home. So I drove him home, yeah. It's always fun, though. I mean, I've always met pretty cool people with it. So I'm contemplating, I think probably tonight I will run the service, but maybe only till like 1:30 or 2. I used to go till 3. I'm getting older.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
In all sincerity, 2 of my favorite, let's throw 3 favorite traditions. Is you got your Thanksgiving dinner, all welcome.
Yep.
Is you have Uncle Jake's taxi service. Yep. And then May 1st, yes, Indy, it's that time.
Yes, indeed it is. That's correct. Wow. Scott, that's impressive, man. That's impressive that you remember that, right? Scott Agnes is our guest. Look, New Year's Eve, I think most people, I was saying earlier, Scott, most people seemingly have the same answer, right? They're like, it's kind of overrated. Like, we go to dinner, but I'm home by 10. It just feels like that's what, when you're a kid, you think the whole world is out celebrating. And then when you're an adult, you realize like hardly anybody is, right?
And the other thing as well, as a kid, it's the one time where you got the excuse to stay up. And so,
totally,
if you're normally in bed 9 or 10, it's like, Mom, Dad, we got to stay up till the ball drops.
Now it's your excuse to go to bed early, right?
I just think for the most part, if you're going out, is it really worth the 5X on whatever you're buying out there? I just don't think it is. I'd rather be.
That's fair.
My situation, I'd much rather be with a small group at somebody's house at one location where you could stay the night. And I've been really getting into this Nashville bash that CBS has done the last 3 or 4 years.
That's fair. Now, you're a Swiftie, right?
I am, and you got Luke Bryan, Morgan Wallen. It's going to be a good bash tonight.
Fair enough. Scott, Jarris Walker got a lot of minutes here, and it was only a couple of games, but they've used him in spot roles with Obi Toppin out. Rick Carlisle, in particular, this morning when he was talking to Kevin and Andy, was complimentary of the things that Walker has been able to do. What sort of growth or stride have you seen from him, and have you seen it consistently enough?
I think with first of all, last year in his rookie year, the number one thing was his shooting. That clearly is the number one thing that he's done, and I think that's continued into this year. Last year, 40%, but that was in limited minutes. This year, he's almost at that number at 38%, and he's getting a lot more minutes. He's reached double figures in 3 straight games. So we talk about consistency. I talk about team consistency needed. We're beginning, I think, to see that from Jarris. And the decision-making is an area that earlier in the season he struggled with. He will still, from time to time, have a fantastic assist, and then the next play down, throw it 3 rows into the stands. And it's like, I like the idea there, but let's tone it down a little bit. So I think with these additional minutes, he has taken advantage of it, like Carlisle acknowledged too. But I think along with the team theme, you just need to see more consistency from when he's out there.
This is kind of inconsequential because it's a player that, isn't one that necessarily is going to be a huge splash, but it's of local interest because of the Indiana tie. Mm-hmm. What has Thomas Bryant brought that Moses Brown did not?
Yeah, I think first of all, Thomas can stretch the floor. Like Moses Brown could not shoot. You wouldn't want Moses Brown to take a shot outside of whatever you would consider like a hook or a floater. So Bryant absolutely can do that. He knocked down a couple threes we saw in the first Boston game. Moses Brown has never attempted a 3 in his NBA career, and it's been about 7 years, 150 or some games. So that's one thing, but you're not really asking that of your backup big. What they need from Thomas is he's been a quick study, according to Carlisle, in absorbing this offense and how they're trying to utilize him. Be an energy guy. He's enthusiastic. I think how many times this season, maybe even that first Boston game, Jake, did we see a situation where they just look lethargic out there? They're lacking. I don't think Thomas ever plays that way. To his fault, maybe. He's even too emotional. So I think he helps in that way, and then he's a better rebounder as well.
You ever notice towards the end of games in key possessions that there is an incredible comfort level for a guy that is not a starter and for a guy that only averages 20 or so minutes a game? If you had to break it down, Scott, is there a guy who the percentage of minutes he gets have a higher percentage of key minutes than Ben Shepherd? Seemingly, Rick Carlisle is very comfortable with him in late moments, whether it's because they're not afraid to have him shooting one of those non-designed shots that we're talking about, or defensively. How big an asset has he become?
Yeah, significant. I think it's really for 3 reasons. First of all, very smart, high IQ player coming out of Belmont. They knew right away. He quickly picked up on the system, starting with Summer League, and then going into the training camp portion. He was a 4-year guy, so he has a little bit more experience to him. That's number one. I think number 2 is defensively. This team doesn't have enough defense, certainly not on the wing as well. He can help in that department. And then the third thing is his shooting ability. He knocked down that huge corner 3 at Boston. This team, especially since they traded away Bruce Brown and then Buddy Hield last season, now I think, Jake, they're at the point they don't have enough shooting, especially in a league where you look at the top teams like the Cavs, who are on a roll. They're shooting more threes per game than even the Celtics are right now, and those are 2 of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, so he adds the shooting element as well. But he's a high-motor guy, Shep is, and he's a guy you just don't worry about. So when you want to know exactly what you're getting from a player or a group out there, there's a confidence level I think Carlisle has in players like Shepherd and out there.
Scott, it was a tough stretch with the road game. Scott Agnes is our guest, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line and Fieldhouse Files, where you can read his work. It was a tough stretch for Indiana. By going on the road, they fared well there. Then they had, obviously, that 2-step with Boston. Now Milwaukee. Then after that, again, a little bit tricky because you got at Miami and Phoenix. But then, am I correct in saying, and you tell me if you disagree, things lighten up for them a little bit through the mid-portion of January because you get Brooklyn, you get Cleveland is obviously very, very good, but you get Detroit in there, Philly, San Antonio, Atlanta. I'm not saying those teams are automatics, but they seem much more manageable. Have they kind of weathered a storm here?
Yeah, I think they certainly have, because if you would have asked me 2 weeks ago, how would you expect the next couple weeks, I thought it was going to be dark. if you could, I was asked, I think in the morning show, if they went 500, how would you feel? And I go, huge success. I mean, if, the fact that they were able to pick up those 5 straight wins, which was their longest win streak of the season, very encouraging, especially able to sweep that 3-game road trip out west. I could have easily seen them lose all 3 of those games. Now, Phoenix, that was a monster win. Sacramento, clearly not in a good spot where they fire Mike Brown mid-season here, or early season. Coming up, though, it does get a little tricky to your point. You do get some lighter teams, but you have the weekend series against Cleveland. You mentioned the San Antonio, but remember, that's a Paris trip. And so that's going to throw off their schedule a little bit at the end of January, where they spend a week over in Paris. They have about 5 days leading up to those games off. And the other good thing is coming back from that trip, they're at home for 2 in a row, which kind of allows them to reset their body clock and such. But that will create a challenge in itself by the end of the month.
You been to Paris, by the way, Scott?
I have, yes.
Are you going to take that trip? Because I would love to take that trip.
I'm hopeful. Let's put it that way.
The biggest buzzkill ever is when they did away with the nonstop on Delta from Indy to Paris.
Yes. I was never able to take advantage of that, and I was really looking forward to doing that sometime.
I'm telling you.
Wasn't the code like DL 500 or something like that?
That's correct. That's exactly right. And I'll tell you what, the most surreal moment of my life, one of them, was being in the Paris airport and looking at the departing flights board, and it's like Amsterdam, Brussels, Melbourne, Indianapolis. You're like, what? Mm-hmm. And you know that half the people walking around are probably like, where is it? Haven't you ever been in an airport where you look up and you're like, where? I've never heard of this city. Where is that? And you know that's what people there had to be thinking about Indianapolis. But nonetheless.
And now, Jake, you'll have to take advantage of the Aer Lingus flight coming up to Dublin.
And I just
did
it.
I think that starts in May.
I just went to Ireland in October, and yeah, it was cool. And I flew Aer Lingus, for that matter, through Chicago, but it was cool. The only drawback is the in-flight entertainment. All of the television shows and movies are Irish. Well, I mean, the movies are obviously American movies, but like the TV shows were all like Irish sitcoms and whatever else. I think Shannon watched Real Housewives of Shannon.
It really let Jake hone in on his Irish accent.
Happy New Year to you. That's right.
Now, did you go to Temple Bar and do all the typical things, the Guinness, the Jameson tours?
I did the Guinness tour, went to Temple Bar, went to the Irish Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum, which is right in Temple Bar, stayed right off of there. Have you been to Dublin, obviously?
I have, yeah. That was my last trip before the pandemic. Went all over Scotland to do Scotch distilleries, and then went over to Dublin for 2. Absolutely.
Scotland was Edinburgh, Scotland is awesome, man. I would move there tomorrow.
That's where we started the trip.
Yeah, very, very cool. All right, Scott, Pacers getting underway just about 40 minutes from now. We'll be sending you out to the Fieldhouse, folks, in about 10 minutes from now. Scott, have a very happy New Year, man. Enjoy your Nashville bash.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Happy
Talk
New
to
Year.
you next year.
Oh, come on, Eddie. You had to go there, didn't you, Eddie?
Someone had to do it, Jake.
You might talk. You don't know. You might talk to him in like 20 minutes, right?
Well, I may text him. I may not talk to him.
The see you next year joke, right?
That's me. That's my kind of funny right there.
Okay. Now, how about this? How long can we go where it is still appropriate to say Happy New Year?
I say 2 days.
That's it?
Yep.
What about simply the first time that you see somebody, so long as it's within like a 2-week period?
Oh, gosh. A week, sure. 2 weeks, no. No.
So if January 10th, you run into your buddy Alec.
Okay.
Your only friend.
Yeah.
You have not seen nor talked to him. Let's say he's been on vacation.
Okay.
Is it appropriate to say, hey, Happy New Year?
I wouldn't think of it, no. So I would say no. I wouldn't think of, oh, hey, man, Happy New Year. No.
Okay.
How was your trip? Good.
You wouldn't say Happy New Year.
No.
How about this? Did you have a Happy New Year?
I don't know. We're 10 days into the year. I probably have already forgotten about it by then.
All right, fair enough.
You?
I mean, I'd say a week. After everybody spent 1 week at work, like next week, we come back on, what, Thursday? I mean, if you see people Thursday or Friday, I think you can say it, right? By the end of next week, it's pretty much over. It's played. we're probably going to talk about this again coming up on Thursday when Jimmy gets back in, but I wanted to rehash it one more time. I'm a little surprised, and frankly, I feel like we've almost let people down that we were not aware of this more so from the Trenches podcast with Zaire Franklin. And Zaire Franklin with his podcast has, look, I get it. I understand why players do it. I understand the importance of building their brand. And, Zaire Franklin has become, and it was a really popular player. I think he's hurt himself a little bit this year, truth be told. And stuff like this probably doesn't help just amongst the fan base. And folks can tell me if I'm being too critical here. But as I mentioned earlier, Franklin is a guy that has been a good player here. He has really good numbers. But I think that when your team is heading down the home stretch of scratching and clawing and doing everything you can to get yourself a playoff position, and during that time you have a guy that's consistently, pining for votes for the Pro Bowl, while I understand it, and I don't think it makes him a bad person, it certainly can give credence to somebody that questions one's biggest intention. This was in October when Zaire Franklin was having discussion on his podcast about what team he would most want to play late in the year.
I want to play a team I know we're going to spank like the Giants or some like,
well, we do play them this year.
So you got I want to play a team that ain't good with a big market. So yeah, so put New York Giants. I'm talking about rank up. You know what I'm saying? Right around November, December. Come on, baby, I need that.
I need that.
Yeah. Daniel Jones, man. Why with your boy? Yeah, I want to play them. I don't want to play no good team. I don't want to play no team I don't want no battle. I'm tired of battling Houston and all these. Give me the sweet teams. Like, give me a 4-11 Giants team. No disrespect to Bobby. I love Bobby. I'm sorry.
Okay, EJ Speed, the other one on there, right?
Tired of battling good teams at the end of the year? Really?
I mean, what do you think happens in the playoffs? They wouldn't know, though, right?
I think Zaire, I'd have to go back and look, see if Zaire was here when they made it last.
But did they battle?
Against Kansas City, I would argue they did. Or was
Buffalo,
was a Kansas City. Buffalo, yeah.
But again,
shows you how forgetful that season was.
That right there, it doesn't make either one of them a bad guy. It makes them, by appearance, guys that are representative of a franchise that does not have accountability. And when yesterday Shane Steichen was answering the question about whether or not guys were late, whether or not guys missed treatments, this is what he had to say to that question.
Yeah, I think with any team, right, not everyone's going to be on time every time, but there is accountability and guys are held to a standard. And that is talked about in-house. And when the standard isn't, not getting in the playoffs, it's frustrating. So it's frustrating for a lot of people, myself included. And that's why we talk about the standard just being raised so we're not, in these situations.
I don't understand that aspect of the standard is not making the playoffs. I mean, he had to have misspoken there, right? I mean, obviously what he meant to say. The problem is this. When you are starting over with a franchise quarterback like you have in Anthony Richardson, what you need in that situation is either, like Andrew Luck had Reggie Wayne. And for that matter, Andrew Luck had Bruce Arians. And I know that initially Chuck Pagano, but he had Bruce Arians also, who was a veteran and been around the league.
And Robert Mathis. And
those and Freeney, right, for a year. Like, Peyton Manning had Jim Mora, who'd been around and was a Grizzly vet coach, right, and a demanding accountability kind of coach. And Anthony Richardson, who himself has his own probably growing to do. I'm not absolving him of blame at all. But when you have between the quarterback, the captains, and the head coach, you got to have at least one of them that has some long in the tooth, automatic when they walk into the room, everybody knows who's in charge level credibility about them. And I don't think in that trilogy you have that within this organization, and I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a young quarterback that, in fact, apparently is showing up late. You have a coach that's saying, yeah, well, that happens and we handle it internally. And then you have a captain that is going on a podcast joking about a team that they want to see because they're tired of battling against good teams and they want to play late in the year. And then late in the year, they go in to go up against that team and they give up 45. Just doesn't work out. Doesn't work out. Pacers in action tonight, or today, I should say. We're so used to saying tonight. It is the Milwaukee Bucks at the Fieldhouse. Giannis is in. Obi Toppin is in. I'll be there. Eddie will be running it. And then New Year's tonight, again, I will most likely be running Uncle Jake's Taxi. You folks have a wonderful and safe New Year, and we will talk to you coming up for the very first show of 2025. That will be on Thursday at noon.